Welcome back to PixelPromenade Intersections, Bridging Boundaries, Co-Creating Tomorrow. I'm Nico Marzian, your host. Thank you for joining. The episodes up until here introduced a framework with 4 pillars and showed it at work across very different domains, from urban mobility to new space. We will now turn the lens around. Across the next several episodes, the framework itself is what gets examined, where it stops working, how it stands in relation to other thinking on ecosystems and coordination, what the more difficult design questions look like when you need to face them seriously. I'm starting today with a question that, in my experience, makes any framework more credible. Where does it not apply? Frameworks tend to expand. The people who develop them want them to be useful, and useful very often gets confused with universal. Over time, the framework starts being offered as the answer to questions it was never created for. And the moment when it stops being the right instrument gets harder to see. A framework becomes more useful once you know where it stops working. It is key to understand what it is actually for, which is more important than universal applicability. So this episode walks through situations where the 4-pillar approach asks the wrong question, or where applying it directly would either miss the actual problem or distort it. In several of these situations, collaboration design still has a role. The role is different, and the conditions under which it works are different. And making that clear is what this episode is about. The framework assumes that coordination is the scarce resource. If only the right actors were aligned, the system would move. That assumption needs careful handling in 3 common situations, though. The first is power asymmetry, when one actor in a value chain holds enough leverage to set terms unilaterally. The structure is already doing what the dominant actor wants. Inviting that actor into a designed collaboration environment changes the language without changing the dynamic. The framework offers little to the dominant actor in that case, because the dominant actor has no reason to use it. But there's a second collaboration story in the same situation, and it deserves attention. The actors on the other side of the asymmetry, smaller suppliers, communities, citizens, small operators, often have a coordination problem of their own. Individually, each is too small to change the terms, but together they may be able to. Coalitions of smaller actors pooling capacity, sharing intelligence, organizing bottom-up are how many power asymmetries get challenged in practice. The 4 pillars apply to that approach directly. Shared environment, human bridging function, intelligence layer, equitable value exchange. The question is who the actors are. Designed collaboration between the dominant actor and the rest is unlikely to shift the balance. Designed collaboration among the rest, with the deliberate goal of changing the balance, is one of the most underused applications of collaborative frameworks. So power asymmetry does not place the framework on the shelf. It changes who the framework is built for and what the work is trying to do. I will come back to this in episode 19, where bottom-up coordination becomes the subject in its own right. The second situation is regulatory deadlock. Some cross-boundary problems stay unsolved because the legal framework that would permit coordination does not yet exist, or because compatible frameworks in adjacent jurisdictions contradict each other. The actors may all want to collaborate, and several of them probably do. The lawyers in the room will tell them they cannot, at least on the terms being proposed. The first order response is to change the rules. The framework cannot do that on its own, but coalitions of actors collaborating to push for regulatory change is itself a coordination challenge that the framework can help structure. Industry consortia that work together to shape the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the cross-sector coalitions that drove the EU Digital Product Passport, The long quiet work of standards bodies that produced the Global System for Mobile Communications, GSM, standard, the whole world has been benefiting from. Each of those is collaboration design at a different level than what the episodes before mostly described. The framework still applies. The goal of the collaboration has shifted from working within the existing rules to reshaping the rules themselves. The third situation is capital structure. There are collaborations that look stalled but are actually well coordinated, just toward a goal that excludes long-term ecosystem value because the capital behind the participants requires shorter-term returns. Sometimes the meeting never starts because the capitalization table makes it impossible. No platform, no human bridging function, and no value exchange mechanism fixes what the cap table is doing. Patient capital, public co-investment, or different ownership model is what the situation actually requires. Collaboration design comes later, after the financing question gets resolved. Here is another situation. The absence of coordination is the correct outcome. Competitive markets that function well rely on actors not coordinating on the things that competition is meant to decide: price, product differentiation, market access. Designing a shared environment that lets actors coordinate on those dimensions produces either antitrust exposure or a collusion mechanism dressed up as an ecosystem. The framework does not apply, and applying it anyway invites trouble. What competitors can and routinely do collaborate on is the layer underneath competition. Pre-competitive standards, shared infrastructure, industry-wide commitments on sustainability, safety, or interoperability. The pharmaceutical industry collaborates on early-stage research methodology. The automotive industry collaborates on charging standards while competing fiercely on the vehicles that use them. The framework applies cleanly to those pre-competitive collaborations, even between actors whose commercial relationship is otherwise adversarial. A different kind of case is where actors have legitimate and irreconcilable interests. A community defending its land against an extractive industry. A small operator protecting trade secrets that are the basis of its survival. A nation refusing to share strategic data with another nation it has reason not to trust. None of these calls for a collaboration framework that tries to bring all parties into one shared environment. Each calls for advocacy, legal protection, diplomatic engagement, or in some cases simply refusal. There is, however, a third move that needs consideration, and it goes further than changing specific rules. Some of the most consequential collaboration work of the coming decades is aimed not at adjusting what the current system permits, but at restructuring what it rewards altogether. Climate transition, circular economy, energy reorganization. The incentives holding these systems in place do not naturally produce the outcomes the physical situation demands. Coordinating among actors who could together force that restructuring is a different order of collaboration from pushing for new regulation or revised standard. It engages the framework directly, with the explicit goal of changing the system's underlying logic. So this category divides. Coordinating against the spirit of competition is wrong, and the framework does not apply. Coordinating beneath competition on shared infrastructure applies perfectly. Coordinating to restructure a system that no individual actor can change alone applies most strongly of all, and is some of the most important work the framework was designed to enable. A note of caution before coming to the time-related limits. It is tempting to say that time-wise some problems are too far-stretching for collaboration design because no institution will outlast the commitment that needs to be made. In several of the domains I have been working in, the time horizons reach far. Climate adaptation, regenerative landscape work, new space governance. None of these become collaboration immune because of their duration. They become collaboration dependent across longer periods than most institutions are set for, which is right when intentional coordination architecture earns its place. The question is how to build collaboration that can be carried across changes of personnel, government, and ownership, not whether to attempt it. There are two situations where time genuinely changes what is possible. The first is the operational crisis, an emergency that requires execution in hours by a single accountable actor with the authority to act. Trying to convene a multi-stakeholder ecosystem in those moments draws attention away from doing what needs to be done. The framework does not apply during the crisis. It often applies before and after preparation, post-incident review, system redesign, but not at the moment of the crisis itself. The second is the irreversible single decision moment. Some decisions, once made, rule out options for everyone afterwards. They demand a different kind of process from continuing coordination. A deliberation with finality, often with formal authority, and with a clear understanding that the decision will be lived with regardless of who later disagrees. Some legal judgments work this way. Some treaty ratifications. Some launch decisions in domains where the launched object cannot be recalled. Outside those two cases, long time horizons mean the framework matters more, not less. Having walked through the limits, here's where the framework does apply clearly. The 4 pillars are for situations in which multiple, capable actors share an interest in an outcome that none of them can produce alone. The coordination structure between them are absent or inadequate, and there is enough time and institutional stability to design before executing, including, very important, design that aims to change the rules or restructure the system the actors operate in. Where those conditions hold, the framework offers something specific, namely a way of designing the shared environment, establishing the human function that holds the work together, structuring the intelligence layer and making the value flows clear and equitable. Where the conditions do not hold, the framework still offers something, at least a diagnostic that helps locate the actual constraint, so that the next intervention addresses what is in the way rather than treating every halt as the same kind of problem. Knowing the difference is important. So, if you are looking at a situation that feels stuck and wondering whether the 4-pillar approach applies, ask first what the actual constraint is. Power, regulation, capital, conflicting interests, time or institutional incapacity each produce stalls that look similar from the outside. Each calls for a different first move. Sometimes this first move is to change the rules of the game. Sometimes it is to coordinate the actors who together could force that change. Sometimes it is to step back entirely and recognize that the absence of coordination is the right answer. Naming what does not fit also shows what does. That is the value of this exercise, and it will be the aim of the episodes ahead. The next episode picks up the question that came out of stress testing this work. How the 4-pillar approach stands in relation to existing thinking on platforms, ecosystems, boundary spanning, and the governance of shared resources. Knowing what is distinctive about a framework requires knowing what it shares with other approaches. That is the next step. Thank you for watching. Take care, and until next time. Goodbye.